The studio lights were warm and bright, just like any other night on The Tonight Show. Cameras panned across a buzzing audience, all excited to see Mark Wahlberg live on stage. The applause was loud as he walked, dressed in black, sharp, and calm, but something felt off. His usual charm, his casual grin, his relaxed jokes, none of it showed up. Mark looked serious. His eyes didn't scan the crowd. They locked straight ahead. Jimmy Fallon greeted him with open arms and a wide smile. "Marky Mark in the house," he joked, earning polite laughter. "Still waking up at 4 a.m. to punch meat? Or just lifting small cars now?" Mark gave a tight smile but didn't play along. The conversation started friendly. Fallon asked about Mark's fitness routine, then his hometown Boston. Then gently moved into the topic of Mark's new film and independent project on addiction, redemption, and the struggle for faith. Mark's voice softened when he spoke. About it, he talked about loss, family, second chances. You could feel he meant it. And then Fallon made the joke. He leaned back and chuckled. "Man, from mugshots to movie sets, Hollywood really does forgive everything, huh?" The words landed like a slap. The audience froze. A few people laughed nervously, unsure what to do. Fallon, still smiling, looked at Mark for a reaction. Mark didn't move. His fingers gripped the edges of the chair. He stared at Fallon. The silence stretched. Fallon tried to recover. "Just kidding. You know I love the new film. Man, it's powerful stuff." But Mark's face didn't change. His voice, when it came, was low and cold. "You think that's funny? My life? My pain? My process? That's a joke to you?" The air thickened. The cameras kept rolling. Fallon blinked, confused. The audience was completely silent now. "You brought me here," Mark said, "to promote something I've bled into. You made it a punchline." He stood up calmly, slowly, reached behind his neck, unhooked his mic, and placed it gently on the chair. Then, without looking back, he walked off the stage. Gasps echoed around the studio. Fallon sat stunned. The crew whispered. The music didn't play for a few seconds. The show was just silence. That night, the internet exploded. Clips flooded Twitter and YouTube with titles like "Mark Wahlberg walks off live" and "Fallon crosses the line." Some fans defended Fallon. It was just a joke. Others slammed him for using someone's past trauma for cheap laughs. But one person, far from the chaos, watched with a different kind of shock. Miles away in Virginia, a retired CIA analyst named Sarah Linton replayed the clip, not once, but 5 times. She wasn't watching Mark's face. She was listening to his words. Not a joke. My pain. My process. It wasn't just a reply. It was a phrase she had heard before long ago. It was part of a psychological script used in a top-secret program during the late 1990s, known only by a few within the agency. The program's name, Gray Circuit. The initiative had focused on reforming higher-risk individuals, ex-convicts, and emotionally unstable youth through an underground behavior reprogramming protocol. Many subjects disappeared into society, thought to be untraceable. Until now. Sarah paused the video. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out an old encrypted drive and connected it to her laptop. The name Wahlberg M appeared on one of the archived case files. She hadn't seen that name on any active list until tonight. Something bigger was moving under the surface that wasn't just a celebrity walking off a talk show. It was someone breaking code. The news cycle didn't stop. Within 12 hours, every major outlet from CNN to BuzzFeed had some version of the story. Mark Wahlberg's silent storm, Fallon's joke backfires live, redemption or rage. But the headlines only scratched the surface. What the public saw was a tense moment between a celebrity and a late-night host. What Sarah Linton saw was something entirely different. She hadn't touched her old CIA terminal in years. After retiring quietly in 2017, she'd sworn off digging into anything that reminded her of Gray Circuit. The program had been buried for a reason. Unregulated psychological engineering, classified correctional methods, covert rehab experiments on forgotten people. It wasn't supposed to see the light of day, but Mark's phrase, not a punchline, a process. Was it? Random. It was part of a phrase drilled into all Gray Circuit candidates during memory recalibration. Your pain is not a punishment. It is a process. She typed into the secure archive system. Access codes still worked. Her screen loaded the oldest batch of digital files, test subjects, field notes, post-protocol placement. When she searched Wahlberg, she found a redacted file, dated 2001, Boston subject type, civilian volunteer, notes, high aggression, religious leanings, potential, redemption trajectory, monitored under Tier 3 civilian deployment. She stared at the monitor. Mark Wahlberg hadn't just lived a troubled youth, he had, at one point, entered a secret CIA pipeline built to quietly reprogram high-risk individuals with violent pasts into productive, controlled civilians. He was never supposed to reference it, and now he had. On national television, across the country, in a sleek Manhattan apartment, Fallon was watching the backlash mount in real time. The PR team had advised silence. NBC executives were panicking over the optics. But Fallon was spiraling. He kept replaying the moment over and over, the joke, the walk-off, and Mark's calm stare. There was something else behind it. A message. He didn't catch. Do you think he planned that? Fallon asked his producer. Like he wanted to send a message. The producer shook his head, uncertain. He didn't tell us anything weird beforehand, just asked for no pre-interview. Said he wanted it natural. Back at her home, Sarah called an old Colleen Haythen-Rees, a former behavioral data analyst, who once ran neural monitoring during Gray Circuit's peak years. You saw it? She asked him the moment he picked up. The Fallon thing, of course. Everyone's talking about it. No, she interrupted. Not the surface. Did you catch what he said? There was a pause. The phrase, yes. Nathan sighed heavily. You think he did it on purpose? He did, Sarah said. He knew the phrase. It was activated. But that's not all. I think he knew the cameras were watching. He wanted this scene. Nathan lowered his voice. You're saying he broke protocol? No, Sarah said. I think he's trying to warn us. Meanwhile, buried in Langley's secure surveillance center, AI flags had begun to trigger. A government-run sentiment engine designed to detect coded language in public broadcasts had picked up Mark's sentence and marked it as Code 4.11, historical program breach. An emergency notification was pushed to a low-level NSA analyst. He forwarded it up the chain. Subject: possible exposure of dormant program Gray Circuit. Within minutes, the alert reached a dark, rarely accessed corridor of the intelligence network, one that didn't use official logos or real names, just code words and silence. The phrase was out. The exposure had happened and someone had to clean it up. What no one outside the agency knew was this: Gray Circuit didn't die. It went private. A rogue offshoot had quietly been operating underground, turning lost people into useful assets. Controlled, tracked, weaponized if needed. Mark Wahlberg may have walked away from the public spotlight, but the shadows hadn't let go of him. And now, by walking off that stage, by saying those exact words, he may have just declared war on the very system that once reprogrammed him. Sarah looked again at the clip. He's not just walking away from a show, she whispered. He's walking toward something else. The sun hadn't yet risen over Washington, D.C. But inside a basement-level conference room of a private intelligence firm, 6 people sat around a long glass table, eyes fixed on a paused video frame. Mark Wahlberg, mid-sentence, face calm, tone steady. The caption beneath him read, "Not a punchline. Process." One man leaned forward. "We have confirmation." The phrase is legacy gray. Tier 3 behavioral lockline. This isn't accidental. A woman across from him, mid-50s hair like polished steel, nodded slowly, and it went live. On national TV, Fallon. Millions of viewers. That's not just exposure, it's a signal. Signal to who? Another asked. Oh, most of the gray. Assets are either lost or retired. She glanced at the paused image. Or waiting. They sat in silence. Everyone in that room had once been connected to Gray's circuit, directly or otherwise. It had started as an experimental rehabilitation program for violent offenders and unstable military veterans, an intersection of psychology, surveillance, and social programming. But the project had gotten out of control. Some candidates went dark, others went public. Mark had been one of the few successful long-term integrations, or so they thought, until now. Across the country, Mark Wahlberg was driving through Northern California, alone. No team, no agent, no assistant. His phone was turned off, battery removed. He drove with a slow, deliberate calm, eyes fixed ahead. His route was burned into memory, a forgotten facility deep in the hills, where the final phase of Gray's circuit had taken place over 2 decades ago. His hand rested lightly on the wheel, but his mind wasn't calm. He remembered it all. Fate. Conditioning. The psychological resets. The hollow-eyed men walking hallways with perfect posture and no memories. The cold therapists who asked, "What are you most ashamed of?" before flooding his brain with simulated shame until he wept and begged to forget. But he also remembered something else, a promise. If you ever say the phrase the lead operative had told him once, we'll know you've remembered and will come. Back in Los Angeles, Fallon's team scrambled to control the narrative. But something was wrong. A senior producer pulled Jimmy aside. "You need to see this." He handed Fallon a laptop. On it, a private message from someone claiming to be a former intelligence officer. No name, just an encrypted video. Fallon hesitated, then pressed play. A man appeared, face blurred, voice modified. "Mr. Fallon, what happened on your show was not just television. It was not a joke gone wrong. You triggered something. Your guest was not just an actor, and your joke activated a legacy trauma. Protocol. You were the final test in a long chain of conditioning. Whether you meant it or not, your words broke something open." Jimmy paled. "Is this real?" The producer swallowed. "There's more." This was sent 2 hours before Wahlberg posted his mugshot online. That means they were coordinating. Fallon slumped into his chair. My God, I was part of something. Meanwhile, Sarah Linton, retired CIA analyst, was now back on the radar. She had just received an anonymous package at her Virginia home, a single flash drive unmarked. Inside, one file. A video from 2001, a therapy session. Mark Wahlberg, 29 years old. He sat in a dimly lit room, speaking to someone off camera. "I want to change," he said, voice breaking. "I don't know which parts of me are real anymore. You're putting thoughts in my head. Memories I can't trust." Then a voice replied, cold and clinical, "Real doesn't matter. Useful does." Sarah sat back, stunned. She remembered that voice. Dr. Edwin Lasky, the architect of Gray Circuit, thought to be dead. She ran a trace on the flash drive metadata. Coordinates: rural Nevada, near a decommissioned communications tower. That same tower had appeared once in the Gray Circuit schematics as an emergency relay node. Why would someone send her this? Unless Mark was heading there. In an NSA sublevel facility, a senior analyst stared at a list on his screen. A grid of former Gray subjects, some marked as inactive, some terminated. But 5 names had recently been reactivated. All of them had quietly started posting strange messages online, subtle, almost poetic. And each one had used a variation of the phrase, "It's not punishment. It's a process." It wasn't just Wahlberg. He had triggered a chain. One by one, old ghosts were waking up. And no one knew if they were coming to warn the world or burn it down. The desert air around the Nevada compound was dry and soundless, except for the crunch of gravel beneath Mark Wahlberg's boots. He had parked his car miles away, choosing to approach on foot. The facility looked abandoned, its main entrance covered in dust, the old gray circuit logo barely visible on a rusted metal door. Mark paused before entering, his hand brushed against the faded emblem. Circle? With a broken triangle inside meant to represent reconstruction through controlled fracture. It felt like a scar. Inside the facility was dead cold. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, some still working, others stuttering. The place had clearly been scrubbed years ago. Files gone, servers wiped, but traces remained, scratched. Floor tiles. A steel chair bolted to the floor. A mirror that wasn't really a mirror. He knew this place, and he wasn't alone anymore. Behind a two-way glass panel, a hidden security camera blinked to life. Miles away, in an undisclosed bunker, Sarah Linton watched the feed on a stolen NSA channel. Her hands trembled slightly. Mark had arrived. Just like the coordinates had suggested. The live feed also showed movement outside the perimeter. A black SUV, then another. Someone else had traced the signal, possibly intelligence agents, maybe worse. Sarah grabbed her go bag and left her home within 5 minutes. Back in New York, Jimmy Fallon's studio was now under tight legal lockdown. NBC executives had flown in from Los Angeles. Fallon sat in a quiet boardroom, scrolling through hundreds of tweets, most of them brutal. Fallon mocks trauma, live on air canceled. Wahlberg walk-off opens, CIA file flood. But it was a private message that shook him the most. A new name, Aiden Cross. Attached was a scanned document, classified. NSA-level clearance. Title: Project Gray Circuit Phase 2, Archive Notes. Fallon read, subject number 041, Cross, Aiden, high risk. Severe PTSD, responsive to key phrase. Only when silence screams. History of post-program instability. Last cited. Off-grid Montana. He looked up. This isn't just about Wahlberg. It's multiplying. In Virginia, Sarah's car cut across the interstate, hands firm on the wheel, her mind racing. She had been part of this once years ago when Gray Circuit had still been a secret pilot under the Department of Behavioral Integration. A short-lived government body that was buried under layers of budget code. The idea was horrifyingly simple. Take criminals and former combat operatives, break them down through immersive trauma simulations, rebuild them as controllable civilian models. Healing through narrative programming, they called it. She'd walked away after seeing the first results. Wahlberg had been one of the more stable outputs, a public success story. A test to see if one could be placed into the media sphere without drawing attention. But she never imagined he'd remember. And now others were activating too. Mark descended deeper into the Nevada compound. He found what he was looking for, a recording room, still functional. A large chair faced a bank of monitors. On the table, a metal box labeled Echo Protocol. He opened it. Inside were 3 things: a satellite phone, a flash drive, and a faded photo. The photo showed Mark standing between 2 other Gray Circuit subjects' faces. He remembered vaguely, but couldn't name. He plugged in the flash drive. A video began playing. Dr. Edwin Lasky, Gray's creator, older now, thinner eyes, wild. Behind thick glasses, if you're seeing this, then one of you remembered. That means the chain has started, and it won't stop. Not unless the source is burned. You are all tools in a story designed to control how the public digests trauma. You're not just survivors. You are templates. Mark paused the video. His breath was heavy. Something deeper was waking inside him. Something they had buried. He picked up the satellite phone and dialed the one number burned into his brain. Since day one. A voice answered. A woman, Mark. It was Sarah. You found it, she said. You sent me the drive, he replied. I didn't send it. I just traced it. Someone wants us both involved again. There was a long pause. Mark, she finally said, how many of you are still out there? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned around because in the shadows of the hallway, someone else was standing, watching him. Aiden Cross, scarred, silent, and holding a loaded flare gun. Back in Washington, a private press briefing had been called by an anonymous cybersecurity analyst. No cameras allowed, only top journalists. They were handed sealed documents printouts of digital signatures hidden in Wahlberg's old mugshot. Post hidden code. One message repeated across the image in deep layer pixel form. System reactivation confirmed. Host codes in motion. Panic spread quietly among those in the room. Because that message meant only one thing. Gray circuit was not a failure, it was a sleeper system. And the actors were awake. The flare gun didn't fire. Aiden Cross stood in the shadows, weapon aimed squarely at Mark Wahlberg, his hand trembling. His face was older than the photo in the file scarred, ragged and broken in a way no rehab ever truly heals. But his eyes were alert, locked, remembering. Mark raised his hand slowly, saying nothing. The two men stared at each other in total silence. The only sound was the soft electric hum from the nearby terminal still playing Lasky's voice on loop. Aiden finally spoke, his voice dry and hoarse. You remembered? Mark nodded. Only what they couldn't erase. Aiden lowered the flare gun, but didn't let go of it. I thought I was the last, he muttered. You're not, said Mark, and we're not alone. Just then, footsteps echoed from deeper inside the compound. Another figure appeared. Sarah Linton stepped into the light, her face pale but calm. She took one look at Aiden and paused. Still twitchy, I see, she said. He almost smiled. Almost, Sarah glanced at the table, saw the open Echo protocol box, the video still playing on loop behind them. Her face hardened. They were supposed to wipe this? Everything. Mark looked at both of them. Why leave the bait? Aiden finally walked closer, holstering the flare gun. He spoke like a man who'd rehearsed this conversation with himself 1,000 times. Because they didn't plan to end Gray Circuit. They planned to privatize it. Mark froze. Sarah blinked. Aiden continued. The program failed publicly, sure. But not in the ways they cared about. The behavior mapping, the trauma coding, the silence response mechanisms, those worked. And now someone's selling them? To who? Sarah asked. Aiden walked over to the terminal and yanked the drive out. The highest bidder, military contractors, political campaigns, intelligence fronts posing as wellness platforms. Mark clenched his fists. So we were test cases. Now it's going live. Sarah shook her head. Not yet. They're still looking for control vectors. They need to see what happens when sleepers interact. ... A wave of cold realization passed through all three of them. Wahlberg's interview. The viral walk-off. It wasn't an accident. It was a trigger test. The phrase, not a punchline, a process. It was never improvised. It was planted memory. A coded recall designed to trigger public attention to activate watchers like Sarah, agents like Aiden, and fragments inside Mark. Himself, they weren't hiding the program anymore. They were measuring it. Sarah turned to Mark. We have to go public. Aiden shook his head. That's what they want. Go public. They discredit us. You're a recovering actor. She's a disgraced analyst. I'm a ghost. They'll turn us into a joke. Then what? Mark asked, wait for them to activate more of us. Use us to control votes, protests, truth itself. A long silence. Then Sarah pulled out a data stick. I've been tracking purchases of certain mind state software. Code overlaps with early Gray Circuit models. There's a firm in Switzerland, Private, funded by a shell company tied to defense lobbying networks. We trace that money, we find. Who owns this now? Mark stared at the data stick. Who do we trust? Sarah laughed, but it had no warmth. No one with a badge, no one with a broadcast. Aiden stepped toward the terminal. We burn the rest of this place, clean it. Then we move fast. Suddenly, a red light flashed above the door. They weren't alone. Outside the compound, a silent drone hovered above the rocky ledge. Inside it, a digital lens zoomed in, transmitting live feed to a bunker in Geneva. A team of analysts watched silently as biometric readings picked up 3 reactivated subjects. An older man in a gray suit stepped forward. His face was calm, his voice cold. Confirmation achieved. Launch phase greenlit. Behind him, monitors flickered news clips, headlines. Facial recognition pings from airport cameras. Mark, Aiden, Sarah, all marked with one status line: uncontained assets. In New York, Jimmy Fallon sat in his office again, this time without lights, without cameras. He scrolled through messages, 2 from his lawyer, 3 from NBC PR, 1 from a blocked contact. A single sentence: you were the first audience. He just didn't know it. He leaned back in his chair, terrified, 'cause suddenly he wasn't sure whether he'd hosted a show or a test. The cold wind howled as the black SUV climbed. The winding road toward an abandoned communications station in the Austrian Alps. Mark sat in the back, staring out the fogged window, his breath calm but heavy. Beside him, Sarah was hunched over her laptop, decrypting the drive they'd recovered from the compound. Aiden sat in front, quiet, watching the road for shadows that didn't move like shadows should. The drive had revealed names, dates, payments, but the most chilling part wasn't the documents. It was the footage, clips of former soldiers and celebrities in rehab. Fragments of video showing therapy sessions interrupted by flashes of light and ultrasonic pulses. People responding in code, eyes blanking out, reacting like chess pieces. Gray Circuit had never been about healing. It had been about rewiring memory under the guise of recovery. Pain wasn't arrested, was repurposed. And now it was being weaponized. Sarah turned to Mark. It's worse than we thought. They didn't just experiment on you. They simulated emotional collapse, then timed public reaction. Your walk-off. From Fallon, it was one of 5 synchronized events. Different subjects, different triggers. Mark didn't flinch. How many passed the test? 3. You were 1. He looked away. What happens to the ones who fail? Aiden spoke. For the first time in an hour, they disappear. The car slowed to a stop. The station was a crumbling steel structure clinging to the cliffside. Inside, old Cold War era radio gear hummed faintly, still alive thanks to fallback power systems. They set up a signal booster and activated a secure satellite channel. Sarah entered a transmission code, Echo 30 burn. It wasn't a broadcast. It was a warning to a handful of people still buried deep in intelligence channels who might still care. She hit send. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the screen flashed, intercepted, session logged. Monitoring initiated. Sarah's blood ran cold. They're inside the fallback grid. They knew we'd come here. Mark stepped back, instinctively scanning the walls. Aiden reached for his weapon. Then the radio flickered to life. Static. Then a voice. Male. Calm. American. Precise. Mr. Wahlberg. Ms. Linton. Mr. Cross, you've gone off script. No one spoke. We hoped you'd continue your healing paths, that the experiment could remain clinical, controlled, but emotional variables always create the most noise. Sarah grabbed the mic. Who are you? A pause. You knew me as Director Holden. Sarah's jaw clenched. Holden's dead. The Gray Circuit hearings, he disappeared. Death is just another layer of clearance, Sarah. Mark stepped forward. Why us? Why public figures? Holden answered without hesitation. Public pain gives cover. It hides science inside. Drama, shame is the best firewall. Your walk-off was a calculated stressor. You passed. Now we know you're still responsive. Aiden leaned over the mic. So what? We're prototypes. You were, now you're liabilities. The line cut. Mark turned to Sarah. They know where we are. Lights in the station began to flicker. In the distance, a low whine grew louder. Not a storm, a drone. Sarah packed up the gear while Aiden rigged thermite charges to the station walls. Mark pulled out an old notebook from his coat. Inside were the names of 6 other cleaned test subjects. Only one name wasn't crossed out. Julia Reyes, he muttered. Former congressional aide. Disappeared after a breakdown on live TV 5 years ago. She's alive, Sarah asked. She remembers what we remember. She's the key. They jumped into the SUV. As they sped away, the mountains behind them lit up with fire as the charges blew. But the drone didn't. Stop following. Aiden stared into the rearview mirror. We need to vanish. Sarah shook her head. We need to escalate. Mark looked out the window again, thinking about the millions of people who saw his walk-off and only saw a moment of discomfort. Not a warning, not a signal. We need the world to feel what we felt, he said, to see it before they live. They were no longer running. They were going to force the truth into daylight, even if it meant burning everything in its path. 3 weeks after the fire in the Austrian Alps, the world still hadn't connected the dots. News agencies reported it as a tragic accident at an old Cold War relay station. No survivors, they said. No evidence of foul play. Mark, Wahlberg's name didn't appear in any report. The NSA, CIA, and GCHQ made sure of that. But Mark wasn't dead. He was very much alive and preparing for the most dangerous act of his life. They were deep underground now in a Cold War NATO facility beneath the Croatian countryside. The tunnels had been sealed for decades, used only by engineers who knew the old map codes. Sarah had reactivated the power using a military-grade generator they'd stolen from a Polish arms smuggler with a grudge against the United States. Aiden was patching together a broadcast rig from fragments of outdated surveillance equipment and modern satellite uplinks. In the corner sat Julia Reyes, disoriented but recovering. She had been sedated when they found her, locked in a trauma facility run by a private contractor with no official charter. They broke her out after intercepting a buried memo that listed her as responsive, unpredictable status, inert. She was now anything but inert. They injected ideas, she whispered, staring at the blank wall of the bunker, and called it healing. Do you understand how insane that is? They rewired grief, then called it progress. Mark knelt beside her. You remember Gray Circuit? She nodded. And I remember what they erased from me afterward, but it's coming back. Sarah slid into the seat at the transmitter station. We're live in 60 seconds. Aiden flipped a final switch. Transmitting on shortwave, dark web live stream, and 5 hijacked university radio stations across Europe and the US. Mark stepped in front of the lens. No makeup, no lights, no polish. Just truth. The camera light turned red. He spoke calmly. I'm not here to sell you a movie. I'm not here to entertain. I'm here because for years I let people turn my mistakes into headlines and my pain into ratings. I stayed quiet while they used my past as a teaching model. Not for recovery, but for control. He paused, breathing. There's a government program called Gray Circuit. It's real. I was part of it. So were others. It didn't just monitor trauma and manipulated it. It created triggers. Tested us on live television, in interviews, on stages. In moments you thought were unscripted, Sarah tapped a key. Clips began playing behind him. Mark's walk-off from Fallon. Julia collapsing on CNN 5 years ago. Aiden, then an anonymous Marine, having a meltdown at a VA fundraiser that led to nationwide reform. Moments that had gone viral. moments that had, in truth, been engineered. Ask yourself, Mark continued, why pain is always public. Why some celebrities spiral, why others vanish. Why certain scandals explode without reason. It's not just algorithms, it's protocol. Julia appeared behind him now, her voice steadier. We were programmed and discarded. Sarah triggered the final upload data pulled from the Austrian drive. Thousands of files, scans, videos, names, some redacted, some high profile, some ... Still active? She released it to the dark web, encrypted copies to major journalists worldwide. There was no going back. Aiden shut down the transmitter. We've got 15 minutes before someone triangulates. Outside, in the distance, helicopters were already cutting across the night sky. Do we scatter? Julia asked. No, Mark said. He opened the heavy door of the tunnel and looked out at the moonlit trees. We lead them in. Let them see what they built. Suicide, Aiden muttered. No, Mark replied, proof. Back in Washington, alarms were ringing. Fort Meade, the server hosting Gray Circuit, burst into a cascade of terminal errors. Files had been duplicated, traced, and flagged. Globally, every nation with an intelligence network was watching now. By morning, the world knew. Not the whole story, but enough. Enough to start asking questions. Enough to doubt the narrative they'd been fed for years. Mark Wahlberg didn't return to Hollywood. Julia didn't re-enter politics. Aiden disappeared. Back into the shadows. Sarah stayed in Europe, running encrypted forums where new whistleblowers began to speak. The world didn't change overnight, but something cracked. Something real. And sometimes that's how revolutions begin. Not with a gunshot, but with a silence on live TV